This is a photograph, the frontispiece of a book, one of 3 volumes published by the Bollingen Society, the selected papers of Ananda Coomaraswamy, and he's sort of a forgotten figure temporarily among the would-be cognoscenti, but he's right up there with Heinrich Zimmer and Mircea Eliade, Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell. Coomaraswamy was very elegant, refined, highly educated Indian. He was the keeper at the Boston Museum of Oriental Antiquities when he was young, married, wrote a number of exceedingly fine books. His books on aesthetics are world-class books. Nature and Transformation, published by Harvard University Press some 60 years ago, is one of the standard books in the world about developing the aesthetic eye of appreciating art. And his books on Buddhism, his books on Indian civilization in particular, have been very widely read. In volume 2 of the selected papers, on page 220, is a little short essay that I want to make use of today. We're going to be talking about black elk. We're going to be talking about the rites of purification of the sweat lodge in particular, and the relationship of the sweat lodge ritual to the Sundance ritual. And we have to understand that when we're talking about the sweat lodge ritual, we're talking about a circle. We're talking about a circle, and even though sometimes today you will find sweat lodges that are rectangular, like wood sheds that they nail blankets up to, but you have to understand that the original sweat lodge was a circular structure, and it was always made out of bent willows. In fact, the construction was very specific. It was 100 willows, the 100 willow sweat lodge. And these willows were all cut at the same time, and they were all cut in a manner where early in the spring, in the North Plains of the United States and the Southern Plains of Canada, in the middle of North America, in the spring, when the willows become green and they first begin to leaf, the sap in the willows make them extremely supple. Willows are already supple, but very, very supple, and it has a certain kind of architectural quality to it. And 100 willows, which are woven together, they're woven in such a way that you literally have a fabric made out of trees. A fabric made out of trees. So that the 100 Willow Sweat Lodge is a circle of man-made architecture using the fabric of trees. And so it's like a clothing of the forest which is cut into a costume for the tribe. You have to get this connection. The sweat lodge is a ceremonial piece of clothing, the weave of which is made out of trees. And it is not worn by an individual, but is worn by the tribe. And generally it was the masculine, the male members of the tribe who were selected, who were excerpted from the tribe, who were placed together in the sweat lodge, in the circle, and that circle was guaranteed by a holy woman. Without her guarantee, there would be no unity to the men. The circle of the sweat lodge is carried over to the circle of the Sundance. The circle of the sweat lodge is the inner circle, and the circle of the sun dance is the outer circle. The Sundance circle is made by the circle of all of the teepees of the tribe. And we want to understand how this wheel within a wheel links together by a common axle. An axle which is an axial symbol. Do you know what an axial symbol would be? Imagine the earth. Imagine a rod going through the North Pole to the South Pole. That would be the axial pole of the earth. Now, if you had an axial pole of the earth going from the North Pole to the South Pole, you would have an abstraction. That axial pole, North Pole, South Pole, is an abstraction. It wouldn't be of any use to anyone except as an abstract image. The real axial pole of the earth are the magnetic poles. The north magnetic pole is shifted from the north geographic pole by about 23 degrees. And that means that the south magnetic pole is shifted from the south pole an equal number of degrees, 23 degrees some minutes. That magnetic pole is the true axial pole of the planet. Every planet has an axial magnetic pole. Even a planet like Venus, which has almost no magnetism, nevertheless has still an axial magnetic pole. Not only does every planet have an axial magnetic pole, every star has an axial magnetic pole. In our star system, all of the planets and our central star, Sol, the sun, and all of the minor planets, all of the moons, lie in a plane that's thinner than a sheet of paper. Even though they seem from our perspective to move up and down, from an actual cosmic view, our star system is flatter than a pancake. Every star system is flatter than a pancake. Every star with a planetary system is like a disk. It's like a circular disk, so that when you see it coming into a planetary system from an interplanetary space, what you see is a wheel. What you see is a wheel, and you would not be able to see it with visual light so much, because in the evolution of a star system, the visual aspect of the wheel becomes invisible in time. The dust that would make up the visible wheel is collected into the bodies, so that you would only see the various points. When Voyager 2 looked back as it was leaving our star system, for the very first time a family photograph was taken. A family photograph was taken about 1991, the end of the Aeon. And it was the first time that beings of this star system could look back through the camera of Voyager 2, and it took a beautiful family portrait of all the planets and our star together. And it looks like points of light, and to the untrained eye, you would not even know that there was a structure there. You wouldn't know. But the training of the eye to pick out the stars and the sun together to see that they form a system, is not enough to see that they are a disk wheel of such unity, paper thin, that only a master jeweler could ever have cut a structure that thin, that integral. The only way to see it is to use magnetic vision. And if you could see the magnetic net that holds the planets and the star together, you would see this beautiful magnetic wheel. And in the case of our particular system, it moves through a galactic motion so huge that it only has spun 9 times since the galaxy has formed. And in its concourse, because the galaxy spins, and the whole galaxy is flatter than a sheet of paper on its level, galaxies that spin and are many thousands of light years thick, actually in terms of a huge dimension of the universe, are thinner than a sheet of paper. And because they haven't absorbed all of the interplanetary dust, you can still visually see the whirling glow, the Milky Way, or the Andromeda Galaxy, or M31, or whatever you're looking at, whatever galaxy. Wheels, magnetic wheels. The sacred energy that is there, not in visible light, in the sweat lodge, holds it together and is guaranteed by the experience of having the center of the sweat lodge removed. The center of the sweat lodge is operative because it is not there geographically. The dirt at the center of the 100 Willow Lodge is not in the lodge. Where is that dirt? That dirt is removed from the sweat lodge a distance, an exact straight line distance, and is mounted outside of the sweat lodge. So that in the sweat lodge, at the center of the sweat lodge, there is a cavity. There is a hole. There is a cavity. There is a space. And without that space, there is no way for sacred energy to pass into the sweat lodge and unify the men. The men cannot be unified by a geography that is there. Men cannot be unified by land that is there. They are unified by land that is purposely left out, not there. Not by land that is not there because it isn't there, but by land that is not there because it was taken out specifically so it would not be there. Men are unified by what they cannot see. They are unified by invisible complements to the visible geography. Men will fight each other over land, but they will unify themselves over the space, the sacred cavity, over the zero-ness that they share, because no one can themselves own what is not there. The unity of men comes through feeling, through the heart, the Anahata chakra. And the only way the Anahata chakras are beaded together into a necklace of the tribe is that each man leaves a space in his heart so that a thread, a common thread, can go through the space in his heart and through the space in each man's heart, linking them together as a necklace of the tribe. This is the way cultures are made, world round, for all time. There is no social unity without this. Political parties do not unify. They make snowballs. They make snowballs that turn icy and hard, and after a while, the only thing you can really do with them is throw them at someone else. The way that you make unity among men is that you open their hearts for a common thread that is introduced from outside, and that each one of them understands that it has to be brought in from outside because it most definitely, specifically, exactly, is not there at the center where they are mutually gathered. It's not there. And knowing that it's not there because it was specifically made to be not there, is what is the beginnings of purification. The beginnings of purification. The very first aspect of a ritual is to begin a purification by creating a gap, a space, which is not there, so that all the men together know together it is now not there. None of us own the center because we all know it's not there because we took it away together. It's not there because we together took it away. We took the center of what we would fight each other over. We took that away together and we put it outside, and none of us have access to it. Its access is through a holy woman. None of us own that woman. None of us have a little private phone tie line to that woman. She does what she does because she independently wishes for life to go on. And she knows that life cannot go on unless men are knit together, woven together, made into a bracelet of life together. And if each man's woman would try to knit them together, the women would fight for their men, who justifiably should fight each other because there's something to fight over if the center of the contention is together removed and is independently in charge of a holy woman that belongs to no man. If she will not bring the key of fire into the center and place the fire independently in the center of the men, then there is no energy whatsoever. And it is the energy shared that links the hearts of the men. This center, this gap, this cavity is called in Sanskrit ka. Kumaraswami's articles, ka and other words denoting zero in connection with the Indian metaphysics of space. Ka. 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 In Sanskrit, in Greek, chaos or chaos. It doesn't mean confusion, it means cavity originally. Cavity. And in the Rig Veda, and particularly, it means specifically the hole in the nave of a wheel through which the axle runs. The Rig Veda is about 3,500 years old. And the usage of the word in the Rig Veda, in the Old Sanskrit, is very clear. It is the cavity through which an axial runs. The axial which holds, because it is there by virtue of a magnetic wholeness which is occurring. No life happens without a magnetic wholeness occurring. We think that we are electrical because you can rub your hairs, if you're hairy throwback like most of us are, and you can get a little bit of a shock, you know that we're electrical. But you know too, without any doubt, that electrical energy is knit together with magnetic energy. It's called electromagnetism. There's no way that that isn't true. But the mathematics, the language that expresses electromagnetic theory, first put together by James Clerk Maxwell, that language, that mathematics of electromagnetic energy solves two different ways. When you have mathematics, you have seen movies of Einstein or somebody writing on the blackboard and they got the little equal sign and they're always trying to figure out, well, what does it equal? What does it solve? And then if you have it, you have to balance the equation, right? The equation has to balance out. It has to solve. And all of the solutions of electromagnetic energy are biased because they are only the electromagnetic. They are balanced in the largest strategy of the true understanding by their complement. The magnetoelectric energy is also there, but it's there by virtue of not being there, just like the cavity in the sweat lodge is really operative because it's not there. If the central ground were in the sweat lodge, it would be on the same physical material level as all the rest of the ground and the men, and then they could fight. And men fight not because they don't understand each other, but because they do. They know damn well why they fight. They fight because they know about the other guy. And he fights them because he knows about you. We fight because we do know about each other. Finding out more about each other to stop fighting is a fool's game. The more men find out about each other, the more reasons they have to fight. You bring peace into the world and concord among men and harmony in human life by disclosing exactly that now there's no center to the trophy. The linchpin that makes it all valuable is not there. And you would literally be fighting over nothing. To continue to fight over the cavity, over the space, when you know it's there, it transfers the word chaos from the cavity to the activity of the people. And so chaos in Greek means disorder, because it is what happens if human life, if men continue to act the way that they would naturally act, it would be chaos. So natural man, in face of the mystery of the cavity, of the space, of the zero, has to change. Because if he continues to be merely natural, he turns into a violent, warring beast. And ritual is all about making the change. Why is there ritual? As something different from nature? Because nature, left to be nature, we would all have been dead hundreds of thousands of years ago. The men would have effectively understood that each was each other's demon and would have killed each other off. We're still here, 5.5 billion, because the solution was understood, because the equation was solved long time ago. The primal solution was solved 500,000 years ago. And if somebody wants to serve notice, one can say that war has been completely stupid for at least 500,000 years. But because the teaching, the sacred teaching of this has been defective for 6,000 years, it's time now to remind everyone that it has been passé for 500,000 years, because that's how long fire has been in man's hand. The placing of fire in man's hand was the first symbol of understanding. The way to make the thread of concord through the hearts of men, to unite disparate males together, and that the carrier of that fire, the carrier of that fire were the women. They were the carrier of that fire. Because the fire was not so much in the hand of man, but in the hand of the women. It's like with the sweat lodge. When the sweat lodge is made, when the 100 willow sweat lodge is woven together, one takes 4 willow sticks and lays them east-west, and 4 willow sticks and lays them north-south. And you put this kind of a pattern, this 4x4 pattern, as a base. Then you take cuttings from the willows and you make a little miniature teepee over this 4x4 base. And when this miniature teepee is made, it is made in such a way that this fire is alongside of the mound of the earth that's taken from the center of the sweat lodge. But that mound of earth is not just dug out. You just don't go in with a shovel. One takes a stake, a willow stake, and pounds it into the ground with chanting. All of the men understand that they must chant together, because this stake that's placed is placed in the center. Wherever it is placed, that's the center. And a single rawhide thong is taken. A single rawhide thong. Why would you take a single rawhide thong? This single rawhide thong we still carry in our vocabulary the word that was used for this single rawhide thong. What was it called? It was called tether. Tether. The way that you train a wild horse is with a tether. If you try to train a wild horse with a club, you will break its spirit before you train it. You cannot train a wild horse with a club. If you continue your stubborn, forceful, warlike techniques, you will never train a single horse. The tether is the sacred way to domesticate wildness. And the horse is the symbol of the power of mobility on the Plains Indian level of society. The horse is the symbol of power and mobility. My daughter's people, the Blackfoot Nation, with less than 3,000 men, controlled a land area the size of France, because they had successfully domesticated the horse and integrated it into their culture to an extent that no other tribe had ever done. They not only controlled, they flourished in an area, a geographic area the size of France. They defended it. Because they could get their hunting done within about a week. It used to take 4 or 5 months to get enough food to see yourself through the long winter, the northern plains. If you've ever gone through a winter in the northern plains, look how difficult it was for the pilgrims sitting around Boston Harbor to get through a winter. The winters in the North Plains are merciless. It gets to 0 around Boston a couple of days of the year. It gets to be 40 or 50 below when the wind chill hits in for months on end. You have to have all of your food. It used to take months. And the Blackfeet, by working the horse into their culture, not only did they have all of their harvesting done within a week or two, but then they had leisure time to travel, to understand many things. The horse was the symbol of power and mobility, just like the automobile in the early days of the 20th century was the symbol of power and mobility. And once upon a time, men tethered their automobiles. Now the autos run wild. You cannot train a horse by clubbing it. You have to use a tether. This rawhide tether is the way in which the circle is made in the sweat lodge. One end to the willow chit, the peg, the stake that's placed in the center, wherever it is, that's the center. And a length of the rawhide is revolved around that stake, and in that circle, all of that earth is scooped out. That cavity, is made there. And that dirt is carried out, and how it is carried, the steps that it is used to carry in a straight line out towards the east. And when it is placed down, that mound is where the holy woman will sit, and she will chant. And that line, that path, will be her tether for the men. That sacred path that leads out of the sweat lodge east to the mound is her tether for those men. Those men together tethered the center of what their contention was about and domesticated themselves out of their wildness, which they most certainly should have. And man naturally has that wildness. This is mine. It's not yours. Or in the Hollywood version, Bud Schulberg's Sammy Glick says, what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. The men agreed to tether themselves and become a unity, and they give over the tether of that unity to a holy woman. She is not a sexual woman for any one of those men. There are no ties there. There are no electromagnetic ties whatsoever between that holy woman and those men. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the exact opposite of that. The exact opposite is knowing that there are no electromagnetic ties. She is not tied at all to those men for any worldly reason. She tethers those men by their mutual agreement because she is not in this world. She is outside of this world. She has nothing to do with this world. She brings in, out of the zero-ness, out of the non-here. She brings out of the non-here the energy of the complementation, which, because it has nothing to do what is here, nothing to do with anything that is here, but with the complementation, it has to do with what is definitely not here. It is present, but it is not here. And we need to have the presence of the not here in the unity of what is here in order to have wholeness. This is how you cinch. This is how you cinch. You cannot cinch with political process. You cannot cinch with political process. The whole point of Plato's Republic, an opera of philosophic dialogue, an operatic dimension of philosophic dialogue, is to show that there is one and only one condition under which a political process could unify men, and that's if philosophers became kings. Or if kings became philosophers. That is the only way. It is the only way that a political process would unify men. It's an if and only if, necessary and sufficient reason. It is the qualifying clause that is lost in every political science course in every university on the planet. It is a glaring flaw. It is a mistake. It is an organizational faux pas. The way one unifies, the way one cinches, the way one hermetically seals, is to take the sides that would contend, and by removing the center of the contention mutually, one seals them in such a way that not only do they not come apart, they cannot be pulled apart. When a sphere of two iron halves, a man named Magdeburg, von Magdeburg, proved this. He took two metal semicircles of a sphere. He placed them together with a little air pump, and he removed all of the air, or most of the air. He made a vacuum. And then he challenged the best of the Prussian forceful men who wanted to club each other, and especially those other guys, to bring them in the line with what we want. They linked up teams and teams of horses to this sphere and tried to pull it apart. And it's amazing, but one can use the phrase in the magneto-electric way. All the king's horses and all the king's men could not pull it apart again. Just the opposite. It's the Wu-Wei Humpty Dumpty. Pardon me, I have to play. When a structure is really made with spiritual insight, understanding how reality works, you cannot pull men apart. They will stay together under the duress of infinite demons trying to work on them. You don't have to worry about these men not working together. They are together. And that the form of their togetherness is so structured, so engineered. Let me use this term. When a hermetic engineer makes a civilization, it is structured so that the forces that would pull it apart are equally distributed throughout the structure and strengthens it. That's called making a real life for human beings. Is that possible? It surely is. The center of it is in the way in which ritual works. You have to understand how ritual works. Why do men and women do rituals? Because they work. Because they're efficacious. And because the efficaciousness does not occur in nature. It occurs only in selected nature. The bottom line of a ritual is the wise selection from nature and the structural use of that selection to weave together a fabric of activity such that you have something that now is natural but has man's action as a circular form bringing it together. The circle of a society, the circle of a tribe, certainly fits into nature, but it is there because the ritual has made that form. So ritual and nature do go together. But they go together in the sense of meeting, not in the sense that ritual dissolves. Ritual forms once made have the capacity to go outside of nature. So that ritual makes forms that are a threshold for future transcendence. They're like the calcium atom on the surface of the cell that allows for an ionic threshold so that foods that are digitalized into energy can send that digitalized waveform through the calcium or the sodium atom into the cell. That's how the cell gets it. You don't have delivery trucks pulling into the cell. There are no loading docks there. I know it sounds very peculiar, but Haven't you ever wondered, well, when you eat that messy Tommy's burger, how does the double chili cheese get into those damn cells and get them going? Because you know that they do. You get about halfway through and suddenly you feel, ugh, because your whole body is clogged with, freight trains full of stuff. How does that happen? Because there are thresholds, and those thresholds are made by ritual. And when man really makes his ritual thresholds right, they work. And the first ritual threshold he made was to understand that fire in the hand removes the darkness from the world. Let's take a break. Yeah. Okay. And then this illustration. Okay, hold it there. The double page spread. And hold it there. Double page spread. And hold it there. Half page top. Get her. Closer, closer, closer. Right in so that she fills the screen. Yeah. Okay. These illustrations come from a book that you usually won't find around. It was a couple $100 when it came out, and that was 13, 14 years ago. Not many people paid much attention, but this woman did a beautiful job on the megalithic art of Western Europe. What's important in some of these images is that megalithic art is what we would call pre-national. There were no things as nations. There were no structures that we would recognize as political structures whatsoever in megalithic times. Megalithic times follow Paleolithic times. There are no political structures in Paleolithic times or in megalithic times. Lithic means rock. Middle Stone Age. Paleo, old Stone Age. Neolithic, New Stone Age. Old Stone Age, Middle Stone Age, New Stone Age. There are no political structures whatsoever in Paleolithic humanity, in megalithic humanity, and in Neolithic humanity. You get the beginnings of structures which decay, and we are living at the end of the Neolithic. We are living at the end of the Neolithic. And in fact, this year is the first year in a whole new time structure. It doesn't belong to the Neolithic at all. We have literally crawled out of the stone-encased cave in which we have lived since we evolved. The stone cave within which we have evolved is this particular planet. We have come out, and rather like the Kafka story of the mole who's afraid to go out because they're going to get him if he goes out, and when he gets hungry enough he has to go out, and when he's out and he gets fed and he comes back and he pauses and he's convinced that they're waiting for him inside of his hole and he's afraid to go back in. So we're caught in a ping pong game of reluctance to go out and reluctance to come back, and we're neither. We're neither out nor back. And we're in a sort of a no man's land. And we're slowly drying out and evaporating. And all of the human institutions on the planet are drying out. They're not going to work anymore. Because we can't go back and just stay there. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't put the new wine in an old wineskin. Why? It will burst it. Because the new wine expands. You have to put new wine in new wineskins. We can't go back. We're afraid to go on. It was characterized by the great Roman poet Lucretius in 50 BC. He said, we can no longer endure the evils which we are guilty of, but we're not strong enough to endure the necessary cure either. And so we are hung out in between. And that's exactly where we are. We are again exactly there. The only way out is the way out. There's only one way out, and that is the only way out. Ritual, at its deepest level, has always provided the rock-sure floor by which we can move and make our way out. What are we making our way out of? We are making our way out of a situation which has endured so long that we have gotten used to thinking that it's just the way things are, that it is nature, and it is not. Ritual helps us to reacquaint ourselves with what is really the field of nature, so that we can let go of the surrogate field that we thought was nature and live. Why do we sing, says the American Indian song? We sing so that we may live. Why do we move in a holy way? So that we may live. The beautiful ending of the Australian dramatic film Iceman, made about 7 or 8 years ago, of the 40,000-year-old Eskimo man who is found and through modern technology is brought to life, and as soon as he's alive again, he continues his vision quest. Not so that he can survive, so that he can finish his quest to die in a holy way so that his people can live. Why would someone give up their lives so that others can live? It ain't natural, and that's right. It's ritual. And one of the mysteries of our time is to twist this, to turn this inside out, so that someone will not give up their lives so others can live, but so that they will continue to live so that others may live. Because it never happens exactly the same. There's always one change. Why is there only one change? Because it's like two wheels, it's like two cycles. If they fit together exactly everywhere, they would merge and become only one. But they need to be two wheels, and so one thing is different, so that the two become a pair. Pairedness only occurs because there's a differential of at least one element. When a spiritual genius like Hosteen Claw weaves a Navajo rug, he leaves a single thread out of the composition. It runs out of the pattern of the blanket, and it's called the spirit thread. So that one makes an airtight form which has only one thread that leads out. So that while it's hermetically sealed against worldly pressures, it is accessible in an invisible path for spiritual energy to exit, to go on in its way. Where I was born, around the Great Lakes, the symbol of shooting the spirit thread's trajectory of freedom was the shell, the seashell that's curved around, this cowrie shell. Anthropologists at one time said, oh, well, the cowrie shell, it looks like a vaginal depression. It must be some kind of Freudian sexual thing. It's not that at all. It is the compression symbol by which emergence happens. Emergence. The Hopi Indians use the diagram of the enclosure with its labyrinthian fourfold nature, just like a little compact labyrinth that has only one way in and one way out. It's not a vaginal opening. It is an emergence vector that occurs because both halves of its electromagnetic form have been brought together and sealed, but sealed in such a way that there is a magnetoelectric line leading out. So that a low energy is not going to be able to escape. If you have a threshold whose gate energy requires a magnetoelectric surge, only when you raise energy to that level will the surge be enough to osmotically release through the gate and go out. If it's below that energy threshold, it will remain within. So that a spiritual seal for that kind of a form keeps the natural culture intact on all natural energy frequencies. As long as the energies are electromagnetic, they stay together, and that culture is whole. The only way that one can emerge from that culture, that electromagnetic seal, is to raise the energy to that 10 billion times level where the magnetoelectric energy pulses through the threshold gate and goes out. This is the way human cells are made. This is the way a computer chip operates. If you do not have an energy threshold which can be crossed, there's no way that anything can happen. And so the gate is like the key of the symbol. That's why the Japanese make so much of a torii gate. It's a threshold. It's a symbol of a threshold. Within this sacred compound, within this Shinto compound, everything is protected and kept together. But if one has the right way, you can walk through the gate either way. A threshold, a gate, is osmotically open. It's a membrane. So that in order to prepare a form so that it may have a threshold, have a gate, you have to stop building walls and you have to start building membranes. Political structures make walls, whereas hermetic structures are membranes, and they accept the appearance, the occurrence of gates in a very natural way. And so if you're dealing with membranes, then you can have thresholds And then when you raise the energy, instead of the energy becoming intolerable and one becoming psychotic because there's no way to get out, one has a way of release to another realm, an outside, another world. Not another world over there, but another world in terms of a larger way of being. And the key to it is the space of the ka, the space of the zero, the space of the cavity. And as long as that cavity is there, by preparatory making together, everyone who made it together will be together when it is energized. So that the men gathered in the 100 Willow Sweat Lodge, they are gathered together around the cavity that has been made by the central pivot and the tether being circled around, and that tether being enlarged to the sacred path leading out to the mound where this dirt has been placed. And the holy woman sits on that mound, and on that mound in one direction, going further east, she tends the sacred fire. I made a whole page of notes, and you can make copies of this and you can see it for yourself. I excerpted the entire lecture and put it on one page. She sits on the mount facing further east and tends the sacred fire, and on that fire of the 4 sticks by 4 sticks, so that you get a square, you get a 4 square, you get a 4 pair. But when the pairedness of the 2 fours is such that you have rotated 1 pair 90 degrees, then they weave together. They make a cross-hatching. Instead of 4 pairs, you get a cross-hatching. You get 4 cross-hatches. But by making them 4 times 4, the cross-hatchings are 4 times 4 instead of just 4 cross-hatchings. You get 16. You get a power of it. You get a power. It's not so much a doubling, but you have to understand that it is raised to a higher power. And 16 is a very sacred gestalt, because each moment of thought has 16 moments in it. Each thought, and a thought is a form, each atomic structure of thought has 16 parts, 8 of which can be discriminated. In a really superior yoga, one can discriminate. There are 8 quite differential sequences, quarks, and 8 of them cannot be differentiated because they always occur in a trill, so that the 9th is the other 8 occurring as a trill. So when you read of a Hermetic treatise found with the Najamati material, and its title is "The 8th Reveals the 9th," that's what they're talking about. And that the 8 is the symbol of completeness, and 9 is the threshold for transcendence, because what comes after the 9 is a new power level, 10, 1 and the 0 together, as a new pair that is able to calibrate and register a whole new dimension. You can only count up to 9 with single digit, but with 2 digits, now you can count 10 times 10. And you can continue to raise those powers by adding a 0 to each new base, and you can do that in a cardinality, geometric opening up, which is indefinite. There's no way that you cannot continue that. This 4 sticks with 4 sticks, upon which the image of the teepee is made. Instead of the image of the teepee being covered by the hide of animals like the buffalo, instead of being covered by a buffalo hide, that teepee is covered by stones. The first four are the four directions, and then there are stones put on top of them, so that when those sticks have fire introduced to them, they burn. And when they burn, when that 4x4, 16-part moment burns, it ignites the teepee structure. And the teepee burns, and when it burns, it heats the rocks. So that you do not have a teepee where someone is going to be in, but you have a teepee where heat, where fire is. And when those rocks are heated, the holy woman takes a forked stick, like a spatula, and she takes a rock from that heated mound, and she turns 180 degrees, and she carries that heated rock down the sacred path, and she introduces it into the circle of the men. And the men take up every space except one. The only space that's left is the threshold entry, where the sacred path comes in. The threshold gate in the membrane is held open, and she comes, and without entering herself, she uses the forked stick to shovel that heated stone in and places it in the cavity. Where there was a stake, a willow stake at one time, because the men worked together to engineer that stake, and with that thong, that tether, they made a circle within the circle, a circle within their circle. And then they scooped out the circle within the circle so that it was a bowl that could receive fire. The fire carried in the form of a rock, a hot rock, physically delivered by the holy woman, who has nothing to do with any of the men, other than she is the common denominator of them all. It is an anthropological mistake to think of her as a mother, although it's universally made. Because mother was the easiest way to think of a woman who's related to all the men, but not theirs, must be a mother, great mother. It isn't that at all. That's it's an anthropological artifact that she should be identified as a mother. I know that this sounds very strange in a society where great mother goddess stuff is big business, and it just isn't so. She is a common denominator for the numerator of each and all of the men together. So that whatever each of them is to her is a fraction of the whole of what all of them are to her together. All of them together with her are a whole. She's the magnetoelectric complement to their electromagnetic element. And she does not remain herself at all, but she becomes malleable and ductile. She is malleable and ductile in a way in which the rock is not. The heated rock is not malleable. The heated rock is not ductile. But she is malleable. She is ductile. Now what can you do with some element which is malleable and ductile? You can stretch it out and make it a thread. You can make it a wire. Her malleability and her ductility is the unifying thread that goes through the hearts of each of them and makes of the men together a necklace, which is the fount of the protectiveness of the people. When when the beads that they are strung together with her malleable ductility, with her threadness, they then are a people. Those men are no longer interested in contention between themselves. They are together as a unit. They will hunt together as a unit. They will protect together as a unit. They will live together as a unit. They will refer to themselves and everyone who is with them in their life as the people. Whatever the language they have, it translates literally as our people. Our people. The holy woman brings this hot stone. And when that hot stone is there, she then brings other hot stones the same way. And each time that she brings a hot stone, punctuating her activity, the flap of the 100 Willow Sweat Lodge, it is covered by animal hides. And only one portion is left open, the gateway, and every time she brings a stone and then goes, that flap is closed so that the interior of the sweat lodge is completely dark. And in the darkness, the only energy that is available is an energy of heat, not of light, of heat. There is no natural visible light in the sweat lodge. Because men have to learn to see with other eyes. They have to learn to see with inner eyes. They can only be together if they have learned to see with inner eyes. Because they can only see that they are knit together if they have that magnetoelectric vision of having the inner eye opened up so that they see each other. Because this man is looking with magnetoelectric eyes, and this man who's looking back at him with magnetoelectric eyes, and they see that they are knit together by this magnetic wave form, carried by the malleability and the ductility of the holy woman, and brought there with its complement of the non-ductile, non-malleable rock, which is now generating heat. So that she makes an invisible sight and the rock makes a physical heat. So that the heat in the darkness complements the seeing within of the invisible realm. So that the men began to see an invisible interior sight at the same time that they are heated by the physicality of the hot rocks, which then began to come in. And on these hot rocks, the man who is in charge of opening and closing the threshold, the gate, in Black Elk's sacred pipe is called the leader. That's not really appropriate. It's like a keeper. He sprinkles a little bit of sweet grass onto the hot rocks in the darkness. It's done on the first rock, and each time new rocks are brought in, it's gone through. And what happens is that the sweet grass vaporizes. You don't see anything, but the incensing of the darkness is apparent, so that one's breath, one is breathing the sweet grass incense, which is made by virtue of the volatility on the hot rocks, so that the heat becomes sensible not only to touch, the primordiality is touch. All logic categories are founded upon the sense of touch. It is the fulcrum. Not sight, not sound, but touch. Because logical categories not founded upon touch are unable to be developed in a transcendental way. So that the incensing of the sweet grass carries touch inside. You breathe the heat inside. It's like the heat is carried inside by virtue of its tagging with the molecules, the scent molecules of the vaporized sweet grass, so that you breathe the heat inside. So that all of this happens in the darkness, but it's a darkness which is punctuated, articulated by the occasional opening of the flap to receive another hot stone that the holy woman brings from the fire and brings it in. There are names for all of this. I have them on the sheet. When there are enough hot rocks and they are heating together, and the sweet grass inside has carried the cavity, energy, heat inside one's lungs, one's breath, then a little water, a little fresh water, is spooned onto the hot rocks, and that becomes steam. The steam densifies in the darkness. It densifies the heat. The water vapor is a densification. And it mellows itself with the sweet grass inside so that you breathe, you inhale a sweet grass steam. So that the lungs are purified in a double-step process, the incense and the incense with steam. It is now that the sacred pipe is lit. The sacred pipe has a bowl. The sacred pipe is a mobile sweat lodge in itself. The bowl of the sacred pipe has a cavity, just like the sweat lodge has a cavity. And a hot coal, which is the essence of the hot rock, lights the tobacco. Actually, it's a herbal mixture. It isn't tobacco at all. It's called knick-knick. It ignites the knick-knick in the calumet, in the sacred pipe. The stem is always held west, so that the bowl is always east. So that the bowl of the sacred pipe is very much like the cavity where the hot rocks are in the sweat lodge. And both of those are linked with a third quality, which is the sacred fire outside at the end of the sacred path. So you have three hot spots. You have the sacred fire outside, you have the heated rocks at the center inside, and you have the bowl of the sacred pipe. Now when you have 3 points, for the very first time, you have a universe where a geometric form is capable of being made. A triangle. If you have only 2 points, all that you can have is a line. When you have 3 points, you have the capacity to have not only a geometric form, but the context in which a geometric form can occur, which is called a plane. When you have 1 fire, you have a point. When you have 2 fires, you have a line. When you have 3 fires, you have a plane. So that when you have a world-class great artist like Wassily Kandinsky writing a book about concerning the spiritual in art in 1910, and a lot of people said, well, what do you mean? He wrote a sequel to it called From Point to Line to Plane, to make it very clear, ABC, that this is the alphabet of how reality happens. And an artist does not make something secondary, she makes something real. That's why art is So, indispensably valuable. It is real. The bowl of the sacred pipe with the knick-knick, the cavity of the sweat lodge, the sacred fire outside. Now there are three things happening in the sweat lodge. There's the scent of the sweet grass. There's the inhalation and also the physical stimulation of the steam. And when the pipe is passed around, you bring the smoke of the sacred pipe into your lungs, and also it is motioned around usually your head, but also meaning your whole body. The smoke, the steam, the incense, all three of these together now make it available for a fourth dimension to occur. And that fourth dimension has occurred when men pray, when they use language, when, to use the Indian term, you send a voice. Now when you send a voice, it isn't just talking. Now when you send a voice, it is adding the fourth dimension of time to the three dimensions of the spatial plane that you've created in a sacred way, so that your voice now goes direct to God. It doesn't go along any wires that any kind of devils can tap into and hear what you're saying. They don't have any technology like that. When you send a voice in a sacred way, it is instantly heard. Instantly heard. So the whole ritual is nothing primitive at all, but is a choreographed sophistication. The reason why it works is because all of the moving parts join together at junctures that are left open and free. And part of the genius of man is that he learned to design with spaces instead of with welded connections. Only an idiot would build forms where everything is touching and riveted and welded. The wisdom way is to build so that where the junctures are, there are spiritual opennesses. And this kind of structure lasts as long as the universe. This is why the fire outside is called the eternal fire. Now there's a very peculiar way of symbolizing this. Sometimes you find it graphically. I once owned a house up here in the Hollywood Hills up by the observatory, and this silver cup was found by some workmen that were doing a patio for me. And the silver cup has embossed on it the sacred tree. But there's a gap and a space between the tree and the roots. It's the old archaic way of expressing that the only way that these roots can nourish this tree is that the energy that's in the roots can jump the gap and get to the tree. And that's the way a synapse gap works in the brain. Because brain cells are remarkable in the organic structure of a cellular being like us. Because the gate in a neurological array, the gate is not so much some kind of atom of calcium or sodium lying on the surface of the cell, but brain cells, neural cells specifically, have a gap for a gate in between them. So that thought physiologically is different from digestion. There's no way in the world that they are the same thing. So when it gets time to get objective about symbols, Symbols are related to ritual in just this way. Ritual has to do with digesting, and symbols have to do with thought. Ritual has to do with building the gates on the surface of the units of life so that the energies can pass through them, whereas symbols have to do with the world of the mind, of thought, where there is a jump over nothingness. The gates are much vaster than just one atom. They're a space that in this universe could be indefinite. And the only way that thought occurs, the only way that clear thought occurs, is to have an education that pays attention to the structure and develops the gaps and spaces along with the information. If you just cram people with instructional data, you get dead heads. And if you pack it in real tight, you get real concrete people. They're definitely concrete, and they're good for ballast. But they don't think, and they don't go off the planet. They sort of line themselves up along other people's roads and make nice little structures of reminders that, well, let's not say it. All of the language that is used in this way is always singing. It's always a sung language, so that the chanted language is the sacred language. Sacred language is primordially a sung language, and the rhythm, the cadence of the language is adapted to the rhythm of the way in which the ritual happens. Whatever the pace of the ritual, that's the cadence of the language. So that if one maps the structure, the largest structure of the way in which a language works, that is exactly the structure in which the shape of the entire ritual cycle occurs. So when a Greek tragic language occurs with a strophe and an antistrophe and a stand, the ritual action also does this. The Greek chorus will move in these ways, so that the ritual movement in a Greek tragedy matches exactly the language structure which is occurring. And if you don't know this, then you don't know what's going on. If you do, you not only know what's going on, but you are touched in your existence by what is happening. The effectiveness is because the existential stamp of the action touches the body in such a way that the language capacity carries it into experience in a very natural flow. So that myth is the flaming of ritual doing into light. When ritual doing builds a friction to a high enough level, it flames into light. Language are the flames of existence. And when you could put language into a single word, a sacred word like a name, it's as if you have put fire in the hand. Because just as man became capable of dimensions of selective nature, living in nature only selectively, not being dissolved in nature so that he didn't know, but selecting nature so that he knew that this was his way. A culture is a selection of nature. And the ability to select language leads to the development of an inner quality of culture. And we're going to experience that and see that. Now I have this page, and you have your works, and if you wish to see how some of the language works it's a little difficult in most of the literature that's available, but I brought out here a book from 1891, the 7th Annual Report of the Bureau of Ethnology. The United States government, once upon a time, was very intelligent about the way things happen. And these annual reports, these big old green volumes, are exceedingly important. This particular 7th report has in it a whole large article, almost book length, on the Mediwewen of the Ojibwa Indians. The Ojibwa are related to the Sioux, related to the Blackfoot in many ways. But the Mediwewen, or the Medicine Society, was brought into descriptive language early enough so that people, old people who were alive at this time in the 1880s, who were talked to, had been born around the turn of the century, so that they kept intact, before there was any kind of sullying contact, any kind of watering down, so that the old Ojibwa Indians who were talked to in the 1880s, who had been born about the time Jefferson came into his presidency, before Lewis and Clark was sent out, was a time when the northern part of the Great Lakes, the American Midwest, was still intact. And I'll talk about this a little bit next week, but what's interesting in here is that there is a complete petroglyph chart available with all of the vocabulary of each petroglyph, so that one learns to see just how language literally is carved out of the action of the ritual. The ritual is a selection of nature, and because it is a selection of nature, it is in its turn amenable to a finer selection. We call something that is a finer selection, when you have a book which is selected information and you want to have a finer selection of this information, then in the back of the book you have an index. And the index proceeds by names, keywords. Language indexes the action of existence and creates the realm of experience. That's how it happens.